And in fact, just this week have been more congressional hearings, the intelligence committees, the armed services committees, and they just keep harping on China is our enemy. China is a threat. And when you try to stand up in the hearings and say, no, it's not, then you get arrested and thrown out, which I still have a court case pending on my last one. But that's what we have to do as activists. We have to be in the hallways. We have to nab these guys and gals that are the warmongers as they come in and out of congressional hearings and wherever we see them.
Hello, everybody. This is Pascal from Neutrality Studies, and today I'm talking to Bevan Ramsden and Anne Wright. Bevan is an Australian-based peace activist, while Anne is one of the United States' most famous and forceful voices against war and interventionism. Both are members of the Pacific Peace Network, which recently launched a peace and solidarity campaign calling on Pacific Rim countries to declare their neutrality for the sake of preventing a US-China war. This is what we want to discuss today, so Bevan, Anne, welcome.
Thank you.
It's great having you both here. And before we go into the neutrality issue, I just need to ask you, Anne, because you just came back to the US from Italy, where you were intimately working with the people from the Freedom Flotilla and this fantastic awareness campaign for the pain of the people in Gaza, and also having 12 people sail actually to Gaza. Can you tell us just a little bit how things are going at the moment, and the how you're assessing what this activism did?
Well, due to the global outcry that's been happening on the Israeli genocide of Gaza and their country's participation and complicity in it, those same people were very, very supportive of the sailing of the Madeline to challenge the Israeli naval blockade of Gaza. And our 12 people that were on board, 6 French persons, and then persons from 6 other countries, sailed and were kidnapped on high seas and international waters, put in prison in Israel for entering the country illegally, and they were taken against their will. 4 of them have already returned home and are already speaking out about the conditions there in detention. 8 others will be on their way today and tomorrow. Mainly because the Israelis want to get them out of there pretty fast, because the Israelis are getting a lot of bad publicity through the sailing of the Madeline. So we appreciate very, very much everyone's concern about them. We also need to be concerned about the global convoy for Gaza, which is now in Cairo, where over 2,000 people from all over the world are flying into Cairo, and we are already getting reports back that hundreds of them have been detained at the airport. Others, the police have gone to the hotels of the people and are taking them back to the airport. So the oppression of people who are standing up for the Palestinians continues, and whether it's going to short imprisonment in Israeli jails as the Madeline, or whether it's flying all the way to Cairo, and then the Egyptians being so complicit in what's happening, the genocide, the lack of food going into Gaza, they will get a definite black mark in their history for what they're doing to the global flotilla or the global convoy. Thank you for asking.
This is such an important example of how actual peace activism has an impact. Even if the Madeleine, the boat, wasn't able to reach Gaza, the way that I do think we are seeing a sea change right now, especially in Europe, when it comes to the perception and the perception and the depiction of Israel and this genocide that's going on. And this is one of the most important works, I think, that peace activists can do. Now we have another initiative of yours, both of you, and of the collective that you're part of, which is to try to talk sense into Pacific Rim countries and de-escalate this goddamn war rhetoric that's going on and that's coming especially from the US side toward China. Bevan, can you maybe speak a little bit to the motivation and the idea behind launching a petition for neutrality?
Well, I think it became obvious to us in the Peace Pacific Network that our countries in this area, particularly the Western Rim countries in the Pacific, are facing the same problem. We are being pressured by the United States to gear up for a war, or their war, they want to have, or they intend to have, with China. We've got these military bases already, US bases in South Korea with lots of troops, and in Japan, in Okinawa, the Philippines, in Guam, and Australia, and the United States building up the facilities there. But the pressure is to increase enormously defence expenditure in these countries, in my country and in those Pacific Rim countries, to make them even more ready for a big one. Now, it's pretty clear that the United States cannot fight a war against China from the west coast of America. They cannot. And they cannot do it without being based and having the support of their allies closer to China on the west of the Pacific. And indeed, that is where this petition we've thought of comes in. It's a call from the people of Australia and South Korea and Japan and Okinawa and Philippines and countries on the Pacific Rim to their governments to say, look, we don't want to be involved in such a war. It's of no advantage and a huge disadvantage to us. And if we say no, if my government and your government say no, we'll take a neutral position in such a war, and as the petition says, refuse to join military preparations for a US-China war, declare you will not fight in a US-China war, declare neutrality should such a war break out, and not allow your sovereign territories or waters to be used in such a war, including the collection and relay of military intelligence, sales of weapons, and hosting combat troops and facilities. That would quarantine the situation such that if our governments did that, I believe we would prevent such a war. I don't believe the United States could fight such a war from the west coast of the United States.
And do you agree? I mean, you're sitting in the US. You've seen a lot of the US, military capabilities. Is this the approach to go?
Well, yes, it is. And I live in Hawaii, which is halfway across the Pacific. And I've, as a U.S. diplomat, before I resigned from the government over the Iraq War, I had a 2-year assignment in the Federated States of Micronesia, one of the 3 small island nations that the United States buys off through the Compact of Free Association. The United States buys what they call the defense rights to this huge area of the Pacific that goes all the way from the Marshall Islands, all the way through the Federated States of Micronesia, and all the way out to Palau. It's a huge part of the expanse of the Pacific, and of course, the territory of Guam is a part of this whole mixture. And as Bevan said, the increase in the number of facilities that are out on these small island nations, even the tiny country of Palau, that usually is known only for its scuba diving, now has 2 new military runways on these small islands. In the Saipan, they are paving the runway that was on one of the islands, Tinian, from which 80 years ago, the United States launched the aircraft that dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And so Tinian is now being revamped for yet another horrible military operation, which we, of course, through this petition and through all sorts of actions are trying to prevent. But it's certainly true. You can't launch from the west coast of the United States, and that's why the United States has these little lily pads all throughout the Pacific. And a big lily pad is where Bevan is in Australia. And I know the Australians are trying desperately to stop all of this.
On the one hand, there is always the danger that allies are forced into a war that they don't want anything to do with, right? Or are being used as proxies. The danger of proxy warfare is dramatic, but even the danger of being used as a launching pad and then being drawn into the war is huge. So the idea of making these places officially declare their neutrality, even if not all of them join, if a large number of them actually did that, you would suck out the oxygen of the war-making capacity, which is one of the reasons why the United States is so ardently against the idea of its allies going in anyway neutral. Bevan, what is the idea behind doing this as a citizen initiative? To try to, you don't try to appeal to the United States, right? You try to appeal to the individual governments of the Pacific Rim.
Absolutely, and we felt too that it's important in this sort of action to know that we're all doing this together. There's some solidarity there between us all. We all have the same problem, and it's in our interest to prevent such a war and to get our governments to take this position. Now, yes, speaking from the Australian position, we are very, very concerned at the militarisation of this continent of ours, and increasingly being set up as a launching pad and a support base for US operations. And indeed, the organisation I'm particularly associated with in Australia, the Independent Peaceful Australia Network, we're commencing a campaign calling for the cancellation of AUKUS and the termination of the Force Posture Agreement. Now, it's quite interesting that this Force Posture Agreement, similar wording is used in other countries. I noticed the one that they've signed in the Philippines, the Enhanced Defence Cooperation Agreement, has a lot of similar wording in about the United States having access to agreed facility in places under their total control for munitions and logistics support and for basing of troops and so on. A similar sort of approach they take to different countries. That's all about giving them a place, a posture, like in Australia, a posture in Australia from which they can work and launch. But further than that, it's about getting us to prepare to help them and spend a lot of money in doing that. We have urgent, as each country has, urgent social needs. And it's a question of what do you spend it on? Why are we spending? And why are we being urged to spend virtually what Australia to almost double our defence expenditure? I think Peter Hess left, the defence minister for the US, I forget how to pronounce his name.
Except.
He was talking about 5%.
Pete Hegseth.
He was talking about 5% being imposed on his ally and the US allies. I mean, Japan spends, I think, about 1%. 5% would be an incredible increase. West Australia spending at 2%. And if they want us to go to 5, or even 3.5, as was said to Defence Minister Miles, that's an enormous diversion of money that we need for other purposes. There are urgent housing needs in Australia and health issues. It's simply diverting money away from those important social needs. For what purpose? I mean, we're not being threatened by China. China's not threatening us in any way at all. In fact, they're a major trading partner for Australia. It's helped make us quite prosperous, the trade with China. Now, the Australian leadership is quite divorced from the Australian people. I must mention this, if I might continue talking, Pascal. 2 years ago, there were 2 national opinion polls implemented in Australia, one by Essential Research, another by the Lowy Institute. Both of them came up, they had a similar question. Both of them came up with a majority of the Australians wanting to keep out of the US-China war and adopt neutrality. Now, I was at the time surprised that the pollsters had used the word neutrality, but it was used, and the majority of the Australian people were opposed to such a war and wanted to adopt a neutrality position. And that encouraged IPAN, our organisation, to complete our study and work on an alternative defence for Australia, which was independent of the US, freed of the US alliance. And that alternative defence policy that we are propagating is based on non-nuclear armed neutrality. Armed, of course, so you can defend your own territory and your own independence, but neutrality in terms of not being involved in these foreign wars that have no concern, should be of no concern to us, and we don't need to be in. Now, the work we did has bounced off to the third major party in Australia, the Greens, and they came out in the last election with an alternative defence policy, which they admitted to us had been encouraged by IPAN's work in Australia, in which they didn't use the word neutrality, but they certainly adopted a self-defence force concept with a small amount of money being spent on the sovereign defence industry, but cancelling AUKUS and that sort of alliance. So progress has been made in Australia. Well, I feel progress, but the feelings of the Australian people are not represented in our leadership at the moment. And it is coming to a crisis because the United States is going to re-examine the AUKUS agreement. I don't think they want to sell Australia their nuclear submarines. I think they want to keep it under their own control. That will create a crisis in our leadership. What are they going to do next? And there's a chance that, in parliamentary-wise, the pressure might be put on to re-examine our relationship, military relationship to the United States, and the need for us to adopt a more independent foreign policy position, one which IPAN says to pursue peace and promote peace in our region and keep out of war.
Anne, can you maybe tell us a bit, what is your analysis? Why does the United States seem so hell-bent on having a war with China? And can you maybe speak a little bit to the fear that is also being created about China being aggressive, China being assertive? You just laid out that the United States has these islets everywhere, but the United States is also, at least the US media, is very adamant about China as being aggressive because it now has 2 aircraft carriers and it dares to drive them into the middle of the Pacific Ocean and even go down. I mean, this must be a threat, right? They are about to invade, aren't they? And they're going to be, I mean, it's Taipei today and it's probably Los Angeles and then New York tomorrow, isn't it?
Well, in order to have such large military budgets, you've got to have an enemy. So even in whenever there's peace, then these guys that make money out of war are always cooking up scenarios where we have threats everywhere. And, right now, the United States has done what they call a non-combatant evacuation out of the Middle East of 3 embassies in the Middle East because of, and they're not even specifying the threat, but we know that Trump has been commenting about not getting an agreement with the Iranians on the nuclear,
the nuclear weapons.
And how you do the, getting higher grades of uranium and stuff like that. That generally just used in uranium or in nuclear power plants, not. And the Iranians keep maintaining, we're not after nuclear weapons because we know exactly what will happen. We're not after those. But the United States can use Iran all the time because they continue to enrich up to a certain point. Same thing with China in terms of with the Chinese now having actually more ships in their Navy than the United States has in its Navy, because the United States has not been building new ships recently. And this idea that 2 little aircraft carriers from China, where the United States has 13 of them, plus an armada that's all over the world, and the fact that the history of China is that, rather than an incursion into Vietnam, and one could argue, the occupation of Tibet, those aren't good things. Um, but China has not been a warmonger like the United States has been. But in order for the corporations that make money out of war and who give political campaign contributions to all the candidates, but particularly to old Trump, they've given a lot. So China, we need an enemy, and China is a good one. Except that everybody knows that if we really get the Chinese teed off at us, I mean, we'll be naked in a month. We won't have any clothes. We won't have any. I mean, if you look at the manufacturing of the world has centered its manufacturing capabilities in China, which has helped China develop and bring millions, hundreds of millions of people out of poverty to much more economically viable lives. But now it's being turned that the Chinese are now the threat, and they are an economic threat in one way, but in no way are they a military threat. And that's why we have many organizations here in the United States, one particularly with Code Pink Women for Peace and others, called China is Not Our Enemy. We have a Veterans for Peace study group about no war with China. So the peace community is seized with this, but trying to get the politicians to back off of it. And in fact, just this week have been more congressional hearings, the intelligence committees, the armed services committees, and they just keep harping on China is our enemy. China is a threat. And when you try to stand up in the hearings and say, no, it's not, then you get arrested and thrown out, which I still have a court case pending on my last one. But that's what we have to do as activists. We have to be in the hallways. We have to nab these guys and gals that are the warmongers as they come in and out of congressional hearings. And wherever we see them, whether it's in the think tanks that are abundant in Washington and they come and speak, then we try to get peace activists into those meetings and stand up and say, we don't believe what you're saying about China is a threat to world security.
How do we convince them, and maybe Bevan, and then also Anne, how do we convince, especially the politicians on people who are not that dogmatic? I mean, convincing the United States is one thing, but convincing politicians in Australia, or convincing them in Japan, or convincing them also maybe even in the Philippines, although the Philippines has legitimate grievances with China and so on, but the Pacific Rim countries, how do we convince these politicians that a neutral posture is in the interest of everybody, and especially in their interest? Some of them don't need much convincing. Indonesia, Vietnam, and so on. I mean, ASEAN countries don't need much convincing, except for the Philippines. But the others, what is your recommendation as activists?
Well, there is no shortcut. The only alternative force that will make the change is the people, our people in our country, and people in each country. And our job as peace activists is to reach out and to involve, and to reach out and involve and organise and keep doing that. And that's why we're organising a national campaign in August against AUKUS and the Forced Posture Agreement in IPAN, and building groups in different places, country areas, in city, suburban areas, just building up that peace force, because ultimately the politicians, most of them are swayed. They're swayed in their electorate by what's going to happen to them, and you just have to build that force. And as it's in the interests of the majority of working people in this country not to get involved in a war with China, and to spend instead on social need that we needs. It's not a difficult thing to talk to people about this. And it's not difficult when you think that the majority have shown in Australia, for example, that they don't want to be involved in such a war and they want neutrality, a neutrality position to be adopted. So we have a base there to work with, but ultimately it's political pressure. The pressure comes in through the electorate, and the politicians, they move. Most of them move when they see a movement, and they take some notice. And it's a long, hard process, but the conditions are more suitable now. I mean, a year ago, the majority of Australians were all for the US military alliance, and in a matter of 5 months since Trump's been in, that has changed dramatically. The Australian Broadcasting Commission in Australia did a poll just recently. 2/3 of Australians say the United States cannot be trusted as a security ally and want to develop a more independent defence capability. Now, that's a huge shift in public opinion in relation to the US alliance. And it's time to work and work hard.
And your recommendation for activism in order to convince, especially people, especially the ones who will argue with this fear mongering, but we need to counter China.
Well,
yeah.
Sorry, Anne first, maybe, and then.
Anne first.
Okay. Well, I think you have to be patient, and you have to be active but patient when you're talking to people that do not agree with you at all, and you're trying to convince them of your point of view. Sometimes we get a little up in arms in a way that alienates the people that we are trying to convince. So I think having as one of the strategies is a low-key campaign in a way that actually fosters dialogue and makes people think about the information that you're giving them, rather than sometimes our very strident, out on the streets, protest with our banners and our everything and our bullhorns. And like, I have a sister that totally disagrees with virtually everything I stand for. But every now and then, if we have a quiet time to talk and turn off Fox News and just have a time to talk, you can make some headroads in this. So that's another strategy. We've got good strategies on the streets and confrontation, but I think we also need to keep in mind that there are other ways that you can convince people, particularly those that don't agree with you much at all.
There was a technique used by independents. Independents in Parliament now have increased in number, and because of disillusionment with the two major parties. And a number of the independents organised kitchen table discussion groups in their electorates. And IPAN's looking at that too. This is the sort of thing, Anne, as you say, just half a dozen people. What do you think about this? And what do you think about that? Did you know this? Did you know that? What do you think? A discussion, one-on-one, two. At that depth, that's where things make headway. Not necessarily screaming out on the streets. We have our rallies. We have those things. They're all important. But the down-to-earth stuff is not so exciting, although I find it quite exciting to talk to people in small groups about the issues of our times and what they think about them. And that's the sort of dialogue that's needed. That's what I'll say. That's all.
I like the concept of the kitchen table. That's really a good way to go about it. A small number of people. And if you add them up, if you can get 10 activists to each say, okay, I'll do 2 kitchen table round tables, and each one of them will have 6. Okay, so then you got 60 plus 60 more. That's 120 people that you've actually had an opportunity to hear what their concerns are. And I think that's another part of it. A lot of people feel that their concerns are not listened to. And sometimes that's what my sister tells me. You tell me what I ought to be thinking, and you don't even listen to why I am concerned about things. And so I'm trying to be a better listener. Although I'll tell you, it grates on my nerves to hear some of her stuff.
Absolutely true, but it's something that faces a lot of us, and also something that I get in the comments a lot, and sometimes emails. What can we do? I mean, we all feel that war around us and mass violence is getting out of hand. I mean, Ukraine is already. I mean, it's a pure catastrophe. Gaza is an even higher catastrophe. I mean, on a really apocalyptic scale, and we all know this can get worse. We feel it at the moment. I get right now emails also from Taiwan saying, like, we feel that we are being made ready to be the next Ukraine, and people would love to do something against it but feel powerless because like platforms and so on. So maybe again Anne first and then Bevan. To people who feel like this, what's your recommendation of what people who have a life, and need to work and so on, and have children and dogs to walk and so on? What can be done in order to push for a good idea like this neutrality of the Pacific Rim countries?
Well, I think first to make sure that these people realize there are groups out there that are working on these issues, and sometimes people that just write in a chat aren't a part of any group. So encouraging them to join a group in solidarity, it makes you feel a lot better when you hear other people talking about the same things and you're not isolated. So joining another group, and then taking on the task of maybe doing a roundtable in your neighborhood and just seeing what happens. I mean, you may lose some friends, you may lose some neighbors. Who knows what'll happen? And that's what the interesting part is. You never can tell that the person next door who you thinks a certain way, but you never talk to them about it. It is a good idea to try to get a small group together, and then, of course, being ready to mobilize on the streets so that you can get major publicity for this point of view. Because if we don't get on the TV stations, if we're not in the newspapers, then on and social media. I mean, we found with the Gaza flotilla from this last year, having young people who know how to make Instagrams, who know how to move messages. It is a game changer for static organizations that really haven't moved a lot. So I would say find some 18, 19, 20-year-old kids and tell them you need some help, and see what they can come up with Instagram and all these other platforms that young people and now older people are really watching.
Bevan?
Yes, well, I agree with everything you said there, Anne, and the social media side of it is very important. And IPAM, we've taken that up in our organisation with 4 media platforms and the person who actually works on that all the time. But yeah, there's no alternative to getting out in the community and raising these issues in a way which so people see how it affects them. I mean, in Australia, we've got a big housing crisis, and everyone knows that. Why are we spending $368 billion on these half a dozen nuclear submarines or whatever? For what purpose? Now that does gel in the community, and in where healthcare and whatever, and the other social needs. So I think if we're talking and addressing the needs and talking about the needs in the community and what should be a priority, and certainly war is not one, and we're not threatened by it. So why are we spending so much on this? And that gets a response. And what are we going to do about it? Okay, we have to get together. We have to talk. Get stuff to our politicians. We have to make our voices heard. And there's so many different ways of doing that. I mean, there was some despair. We marched for the Palestinians every Sunday for a year. At least it's now down to a fortnight. 10,000 people, sometimes 5,000, sometimes 20,000 in Sydney, and marching around the city. Peaceful, right? So I said to some of the organisers, if we'd smash shop windows, we'd get some publicity. But we don't. We're peaceful. What we say is humanitarian. We aren't anti-Semitic in any way. But it gets so little coverage or recognition. So it even has to go beyond that. That's a group of people who are dedicated and concerned, but it has to go out further into the community. We have to go deeper into the community. Working people are working pretty hard. You've got a family and whatever, you've got 2 jobs and all the rest of it. And you haven't got a lot of time. But if you can make the issue one which people feel, this is affecting me and my way of life and my kids, yes, I want to say something about this or do something about it. That's what we're trying to get to. It's a long, hard journey, and as you say, you've got to have patience. Those who want to throw a Molotov cocktail or something, some radical thing, it's not the answer. It's a very hard, patient work. I've seen, in the last couple of decades, I've seen movement in Australia, and it's very encouraging to me at the moment that Trump has caused people to rethink. And there is a rethinking going on, and it'll hit our leadership sooner or later. It's going to hit them. It's starting to hit them electorally because their primary vote is dropping every year. The 2 major parties, their primary vote's dropping, and they get in by second preferences from other parties. But that should be of concern to them, and it will be increasingly one as they face that disillusionment with the way they're heading at the moment.
Yeah, so I absolutely agree. And right now is the time to also tap into these feelings and actually try to convince people that the only way to maintain the peace is by sucking away the drive toward war, right? Maintaining peace means preventing war, and war is done as a sociological phenomenon when entire societies then move toward mass violence, and neutrality is one of the ways in order to diffuse this situation. My friends, before I let you go, first Anne and then Bevan, give me a short more plea for why you think everybody should now go out and sign this neutrality petition.
Well, all they have to do is look on the internet and on TV and see the pictures of what war does to countries, what war does to the country that's being destroyed, and what war does to the destroyer. Right now, we have over 20 U.S. military veterans that commit suicide every day, and I predict the Israeli military they already have suicides going on. The levels of domestic violence by the destroyers is horrific. So war destroys not only the infrastructure and people of the target country, but it destroys the moral fiber of the country that's doing the destruction.
Absolutely. Look, Pascal, I just wanted to mention that we are launching this neutrality petition on the 21st of June, and I don't know whether you are able to give the website details in this program to viewers, so they could perhaps be able to join in if they wish. But I certainly commend people to be involved in that launch and to be involved in our petition. It's a way of helping to prevent a war, to help to quarantine it, and as I say, even to prevent it, because the Americans need the countries in this region to give them support, give them a base for operations, to join in with them, and to spend a lot of hard-earned cash to do it. And we can't afford to do that. We have too many other important, real social needs. And of course, we can't afford to get caught up in such a war. It would be a great disaster for everyone in our region. So yes, please join our launch of the petition. Please be involved in it. And if Pascal can give those details to our viewers, that would be very helpful. Thank you, Pascal.
The details will be in the description of this video, all the links, and please join also the launch if you can. Please sign the petition, whether you're from a Pacific Rim country or not, show your support. Anne Wright and Bevan Ramsden, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you. Thank
you,
you.
Pascal.